Centennial year, this should be the most crowded. But you know, some of us don't show up till you know when and you know when. Norman Powell, Alumni Board President, glad to welcome you here. So glad you're here. As a history major when I was an undergrad here, I would wish to stay for the entire presentation, but as Alumni Board President, they have me running all over the place. So my apologies for that. But I'm really happy to welcome our presenter here that I knew when he was there, okay? I had to say that, you understand? Of course.
So Professor Powell was my principal in first grade, so that's how far we go back. But welcome to everyone that's joining us here in person and on the live stream. My name is Andrew Howe. I'm a professor of history here at La Sierra University, but I'm also a proud alumni member of the class of 1996. And I see others that I went to school with, and perhaps some people that were here before my time. And then maybe class of 2037 or something. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, 2035. Okay. So welcome home to La Sierra University for this homecoming in La Sierra's 100th year. Of course, this October we will be celebrating our actual 100th anniversary on October 3rd. So it's a pretty good time to celebrate our past. In this presentation, which will do a little bit of history and also talk a little bit about the history project, the Centennial book, which will be released later this fall. I'm going to focus on maybe some of older pictures, maybe some history in the more distant past. I think most of us are more intimately familiar with the campus today, or even the campus in the last 50 years. And of course, I will be talking about some of the second half of La Sierra University, but we will go back a little bit further. It's going to be less sort of an overview of history rather than just snapshots. Okay, you can read about the thorough history in October when the book, projected at quite a few pages, is released. Yeah. Okay, so you know, if you'd like to spend more time examining some of these photographs, if you feel like I maybe went by them a little bit too quickly, and you'd like to have a walk down memory lane, I of course will be up here afterwards. And you can also share your stories and memories with me, which is very apropos since I am editing or co-editing the book. Okay, so according to some eschatologies, Adam was 10 feet tall. Now, I'm not so sure about that, but I have located visual evidence that La Sierra's pioneers were indeed giants. I don't exactly know the provenance of this photo, but I can only assume that it was a miniature house built for the amusement of children. And it's kind of, you can see they have built a foundation, and it's one of about three photographs of this miniature house that I've been able to find in the archives. The school's founders were indeed giants, not physically, but in the service that they gave to the institution in forming it literally out of the dust. People like Kel J. Reynolds, Lila Godfrey, and Lester Cushman, and later John T. Hamilton, and Frederick G. Hoyt, and Luella Kretschmar, Grace Alvarez, Wilfred J. Airy, Marguerite Hiltz, and countless others who made differences in the lives of thousands and thousands of students. My fondest wish is that on October 3rd, these individuals would be granted an hour to be able to walk the campus and see what their good deeds have brought. You know, there's in this type of work, there's a certain amount of serendipity, and one of these is the Stuyvesant letter, which came to our attention just about 2 months ago. So we're very happy that it came in time to be included in the Centennial Book collection. Very few primary documents exist from La Sierra's first decade, but this is one. It's a letter written by Spanish teacher Paul Stuyvesant to his family, dated October 11th, 1924, and it provides rare insight into the daily routines to which he and other early teachers adhered. Very dear home folk, it is almost time for me to blink the lights, but I must write this or I shall not be able to get it off this week. The weeks do slip away so quickly when one has so much to do. It seems that each year is more crowded than the one before. This one is almost the limit, though, it seems. Here is the program. Rising bell at 5:45, dress, shave, ring worship bells, and be ready to lead worship at 6:15. Breakfast at 6:30, and I punch meal tickets. Be out at farm at head of work crew at 7:15, 3/4 of an hour after breakfast bell rings. Stop work 9:15 and go to office to report time, bathe, dress, and be in charge of the dorm study. Toll chapel at 11:45, dinner bell and ticket punching at 12:15, and rhetoric class from 1:15 to 2:40. Prepare for Spanish class and put work on board and correct papers. Spanish class from 4:05 to 5:45, 15 minutes to help slow students. Supper bell 6 p.m., punch ticket, eat, assist with worship at 6:45, supervised study period from 7:10 to 9:15, blink lights and see boys into bed at 9:30, look about buildings and see that all is well, sleep with one eye open to see that nothing happens. Usually it is 11 o'clock or so before I can get to bed because with so close a program, the extras wait till night. Quite the program. Makes me exhausted even just to think about it. And in the second half of his letter, he seems to indicate that it's an easier job than it was 2 years prior when they first started and didn't have electricity and things of that matter. So these early pioneers worked very hard, and sometimes I wonder what was in the water or the watermelons in order to sort of keep them driving. This next slide is a sort of an interesting, there's a whole bunch of colorized photographs in the collection. I mean, I'm talking dozens and dozens of these, from the late 1920s and in the early 1930s. And it's hard to date them specifically to which time period they're from. I wish we could assign them more accurately because as a historian, it would be fascinating to know if this was before or after the arrival of the Great Depression and the drought conditions that led to the Dust Bowl, most famously in the interior of the United States, but also in California as well. I think this is one of the most garish of the, which is why I selected it. So I'm not sure how colorful Lester Cushman was, but he was sure lively. He truly was a Renaissance scholar, and I pick him to sort of illustrate one of the early pioneers who really helped create this institution academically. He taught physics in the physics department, the chemistry department, and the mathematics department, and the biology department at various different times of his long career. I saw at one point that he was referred to as a one-man walking science department. He, in fact, indeed was a human dynamo. The 1930-31 criterion records him engaged in the following activities, just in different stories, among many others, by the way. Lecturing and managing labs, bringing in guest speakers, playing cornet and trumpet solos at worships and other campus events, organizing Pathfinder meetings, operating a radio station from his home, from his garage, overseeing the annual Criterion subscription drive, collecting insects for the college museum, ferrying students into Los Angeles to visit various museums, taking students on bird-watching extended weekend camping trips, and even capturing a live rattlesnake that wandered onto campus and subsequently dispatching it as well. So he really was a whirling dervish of energy. Other early faculty contributed in different ways. Mabel V. Jensen on the left was one of the original 8 faculty, along with Lila Godfrey on the right. And Mabel V. Jensen was a normal school started out as the normal school teacher, and then became a longtime professor in the education department, the only individual, to the best of my knowledge and research, to be present for the entirety of the school's first 50 years. She was there in 1922. She retired in 1962 as one of the first 2 emerita professors, along with Edna Farnsworth in music. And she continued to be listed as emerita deep into the 1970s and even into the 1980s. So her association, she didn't teach the longest. That distinction goes to somebody else, but she was here for the first 50 years. Her name was Mabel V. Jensen. Mabel V. Jensen. Lila Godfrey on the right was one of the original faculty and La Sierra's first mathematics teacher. Indeed, La Sierra's first mathematics graduate and first computer science graduate after the formation of these majors much later were also women as well. The first three buildings, the story will be told in great detail about the raising for money for these buildings. That was initially going to be a two-conference affair that soon became a project of the Southeast California Conference and over the objection of the North American Division. But before too long, other sources back east agreed with the decision, and the first three buildings sprang up on this sort of dusty plain. So here we have another one of our colorized photos from this time period. And you can see that there's not much yet with the farm, but they have already planted and are busy cultivating a very small, or it's a very large citrus orchard with very small trees that would later grow in size. This photograph is shot from the top of 2-bit. So it's kind of backwards from the way we see campus. So on the very right is the first building in the history of La Sierra to be constructed in 1922. And by the way, all three of these buildings went by three different names at three different points, which is kind of interesting. It was first called South Hall. And at some point in, I think, the 1930s, I have the year specifically listed in the book somewhere, it was renamed MBK, Mu Beta Kappa, okay, for the boys organization that lived on campus. It kept the name MBK until the late 1960s when Sierra Towers was constructed and became the men's dorm, at which point it reverted back to South Hall. You can also find a third name in the 1920s and early 30s, which is Boys Dorm, listed on maps and in official publications. Sometimes Men's Dorm, so maybe it has four names. It's the same trajectory for the building you see on your left, which is, and by the way, today South Hall houses the honors program. Gladwin Hall on your left started out as North Hall, believe it or not. So there wasn't a tremendous amount of creativity when naming these buildings at first, and it also went by the name Girls Dorm. We can't date it to a specific year, but I think it has to be either 1926 or 1927. The female residents named this building Gladwin. So it's interesting that the name that Gladwin has had for over 90 years, and the name that South Hall has for more than half its history, or almost half its history, were chosen by students. Gladwin supposedly is Welsh for fair home. Win is certainly Welsh, but the word GLAD is not. So I'm not sure that origin story can be completely trusted. And then there's the exhausting case of what we today call La Sierra Hall. It was initially called the Administration Building. Okay, so once again, there wasn't a lot of creativity in naming these North Hall, South Hall, Administration Building. At some point, they decided that it was a building that did more than just administer, so they started calling it College Hall. But then, of course, they created the auditorium, which picked up the name College Hall, so they couldn't call it College Hall anymore. It went back to being called the Administration Building, but then the new Administration Building was built to house Fulton Memorial Library. And at that point, in 1945, 1946, it became La Sierra Hall, a name that it has carried ever since. I think it's a miracle that the students during this time were able to figure out which building to go to class in. So just a few slides of La Sierra Hall. Do you notice anything missing in this photograph? Yes, they're actually there. If you look, you can see the tiny little palm trees, and I think there's going to be a tree walk later. Nate is. Oh, it just finished. Okay, so some of you may have gone on that, and this is what it looked like about 90 years ago, before these trees, which are now so iconic for our beautiful campus. That's what you got to plant. You got to plant a seed, and maybe 100 years from now, they'll be contemplating some of the 100 trees that were planted and are in the process of being planted for this event. This La Sierra Hall was very functional. It was not just the administration building and the original site for classrooms. The cafeteria was in the downstairs of La Sierra Hall. On the top floor was the library. This is a very special building for my family. When my dad first came to La Sierra in 1974 to join the mathematics faculty, the math department was located in the basement of of La Sierra Hall. When my mother joined the faculty in 1991, the English department was located in the mezzanine of South Hall. And when I joined the faculty in 2005, the history department was located on the top floor of La Sierra Hall. So all three of us, we ended up moving to different buildings, but we all started our careers in La Sierra Hall. The first chapel for campus use was also here, which also meant that it was the first La Sierra church. The La Sierra University Church that some of us attend or are members of or have at least visited got its start in the basement of La Sierra Hall, which now houses 3 of the 5 academic dean offices for the School of Religion, as well as the College of Arts and Sciences and the University Studies as well. Now, we often, talk about the presidents during this time period, and they were very, very important. But you saw a pattern develop in the early history of La Sierra, particularly with Constantine, which is that there was so much work to do off campus. There was so much work to do with making connections that in the early going, a lot of these types of things, these decisions were being handled by some of what they called them business managers at the time. Business manager W.C. Raley was a key figure during the first decade in building a lot of these initial buildings. In fact, some of us drive on is it Raley Drive, I think, right? Raley Drive. It goes up the side of the campus. Carl Alms was probably, when it comes to the physical plant, the most important figure during this time period, during the 1930s and 1940s. And you would have to add David Gurgis to this as well. And I think between Alms and Gurgis, if you add up their two time periods, it's 40 out of the 100 years exactly. I'm not going to show every building, but there's just a few I want to show. I love this photograph. It's San Fernando Hall, which has long been a science building and now houses in its entirety the physics department. And this photograph is, I think, very interesting because it shows I think it's not a bad merger between Southwest Mission architecture style and East Coast Ivy League botanical adornment. So it's a pretty unique photograph, and I had no idea until I found this that it used to have ivy. Actually, a lot of the buildings did. You can find a lot of old photographs of buildings around campus. This is the campus service station. I can't figure out exactly where this is. The college store at one point was at sort of the site of what we would today call Sierra Vista Chapel, but I think from the orientation of Two-Bit, that's clearly not the case here. So I haven't found anybody yet that can perfectly tell me where the psychology building. So Alms Hall.
The post office on the left-hand side there.
Okay. Yeah, no, so Alms Hall, essentially where Alms Hall is. Okay, so so it is. My dad was right then. That this is. It just looks like Two-Bit should be a different, but I could be wrong on that. So we had a service station, a college store, and on the site of Sierra Vista Chapel, which is right now across the street from the church. We also had a fire department as well, and not only that, occasionally they would sound, if people heard the siren, not at noon, they knew that there was a fire somewhere, like in the local hills, and all the guys would go rushing out, drop all their textbooks, be picked up in a bus, and would be rushed off to fight fires. This happened annually. It just appears all over the Criterion, up through probably the early 1950s, at which point professional fire departments started taking over all aspects of Western Riverside. The college market, it's gone by many names over the years, but Health Food Store obviously goes back a long ways and has provided health foods and other products and goods for the community ever since. Does anybody know what this building is? Took me a while to figure this one out. It's the grade school. And the reason we don't know it is that it burned down in 1945. Okay, so yeah, you might be dating yourself a little bit if you raise your hand. Oh yeah, I remember that building, right? But it's one of two buildings that burned on campus, both suspected to be arson. We'll talk about the other one a little bit later. Here it's a little bit clear. I didn't show this photograph and asked if you could figure it out because I think it would be a little. This, of course, is over near Palmer Hall, in that general area. The key figure, a very key figure during the sort of the middle part of early to middle part of La Sierra's institutional history is, of course, E.E. Constantine. He was president from 1930 to 1942, which is tied with Randall Wisby for the second longest tenured president, and behind Lawrence Garrity at 14 years. And I believe that I saw Larry early. Oh, they're sitting right there. So, it's essentially 40 years between these three individuals who steered La Sierra through different time periods with different faculties and different staffs and, different challenges. But with the same sense of mission to build something important, build something special, build something that we want, that students will want to come here, and then will leave here with a tremendous desire to make their mark upon the world. If you read the 1930s Criterion, it seems as if you can never really find an issue without Constantine's movements being reported on. Okay, he was everywhere. He took trains all over the place. There's a reference in a lecture that Fred Hoyt gave one time where he sort of indicated that he went through like a car a year because he would just put on like 100,000 miles. He drove all over the place, promoting La Sierra, promoting our programs, recruiting, forming relationships. It was a very important thing to do during this time period, and he employed what he called citrus diplomacy, which is that he would take gifts of oranges to give to people. It was A, inexpensive, and B, signaled something about Southern California, and that probably played very well in Minnesota in February, for instance. Famously, and I'm not sure what the status is on a film that hopefully will be coming out at some point. He stood up for, the famous story for Constantine is when he helped 5 Japanese American students who were forcibly removed from La Sierra and placed into internment camps. And we never hear their names, so I'm going to read them off now. His name's important, obviously, in this story, but so are theirs. Masao Gima, Sayu Hashizaki, Gertrude Yashimoto, Toshiko Chinen, and Sashiko Chinen, all graduates of Hawaiian Mission Academy. He was able to, this was about the time that he relocated and became president of Union College. Union College was east of the exclusion zone, and he was able to free these 5, and actually others, by the way, which is usually not reported on, and bring them to Union College where they could continue their studies. There's and I think Michael Schofield sent me both of these photographs. There's a sort of about a decade where you get all these panoramic photographs of everybody out in front of the campus. And I think it diminishes for two reasons. Number one, the GI Bill. It became impossible to place everybody in front of the campus. There's just too many people. And number two, I think there was a gee whiz factor that had probably played itself out by 1946. But these are very interesting. Okay, they're you can kind of go over them with the little magnifying glasses and try to figure out certain interesting things. Like, for instance, uniforms. The one I'm going to talk about here addresses the dangers of trying, in an absence of institutional data about race, making determinations phenotypically. But you'll notice this is actually a close-up of the bottom here, which is the top one's from 1931, the bottom one's from 1940. And here, very strategically placed, if you see...
Constantine is in the center.
This is Constantine right here. And right sort of at his shoulder is a gentleman by the name of Douglas Batson. Okay? Now, Douglas Batson, to the best of my research, is the first African-American to be to have an article about him in the Criterion, actually in 1941. Now, Maury Jackson and Eugene Joseph have discovered evidence of black students at La Sierra prior to that, but very, very few and far between. But Douglas Batson actually had a bio in the Criterion, which was somewhat of a breakthrough during a time period where diversity was decidedly lacking at La Sierra University, in the student body, but particularly in the faculty and staff. And sadly, even though this was a bit of a breakthrough, one might imagine what the topic of the Douglas Batson bio was. It was involving religious life, because through the 1960s, most articles about black students focused on religious life, right? Gospel ministry, things of that nature. And Douglas Batson was the chaplain for his senior class. I think that was also maybe a little bit of a breakthrough. And had a gospel ministry that he conducted in San Bernardino. So I'm just going to turn to a couple of programs which no longer exist. The first is home economics, learning how to become homemakers with classes and topics such as cooking and sewing. This was very, very commonplace at universities and colleges during this time period. And, I think it says a lot about how we sometimes come full circle. No, we're not having classes in home ec or industrial arts, which is my next slide. But we are starting to talk about maybe knowledge base isn't necessarily what we need to be doing in its entirety in education, and how we need to inculcate more skill-based instruction and have classes based in skill areas. So, I think there's some, I think I can think of at least one person in here who was in the agriculture department. The agriculture department and the home ec and industrial arts were throughout much of La Sierra's history. But at some point, the university decided, we want to move in a different direction. And of course, now we're talking about, not necessarily embracing these programs, but embracing some of the philosophies. Because when La Sierra was formed, most Adventist schools followed the advice of Ellen G. White that you should have some sort of skills-based trade classes, that you should teach practical skills, and that you should have an industry that would help pay for the self-sustainability of the institution. And then you should provide jobs for your students. The industrial arts program, yes, it is true that we did have a class, and I'm not joking when I say this, in basket weaving, okay? Unfortunately, the scuba, to the best of my knowledge, this class had gone before they started teaching scuba in the 1970s, so we never had underwater basket weaving. But The photo on the left is actually not from a class. It's from the Reed Company, which operated on campus for a while. It wasn't uncommon during this time period, and I'm now talking about like 30s through 50s, and even into the 70s, for industries and businesses to rent space on campus and to employ students. It was something that was actually fairly, it wasn't common necessarily, but it wasn't uncommon, okay? Including computer companies and chip companies and different things of that nature. On the right, they're soldering and forming tin. Apparently that's a skill that came in handy during that time period. Then I'm just going to show some slides about the changing face of campus. This slide is from 1940. No, it's a little bit after 1940, like 1941, I think. I call them the next four buildings, filling out the seven buildings sort of almost horseshoe. On the far left, you have Calkins, and on the far right, you have Angwin, both residential dorms. San Fernando, in between La Sierra Hall and South Hall, that I already showed you a picture of. And then HMA, which is that sort of beveled one that you see, was the for the music department. Sadly, Willits J. Hull, who had sold the Southeastern California Conference the property at a really reduced rate and gave them free access to wells, and really a friend of the university. Sadly, he had given $10,000 and then a further gift towards HMA. He passed away 1 week before its official opening, but he knew it was. He believed in the mission. He saw the early part of the mission, and we still enjoy music programs in HMA to this very day. This one's taken in 1947. Notice that Citrus is still a part of the campus. You'll see a lot of aerial photographs from this time period, from the 30s and 40s. You'll see why in just a bit. And note down in the bottom right that the church was still fairly new in 1947. In fact, it was just built. You can see that it is a dirt parking lot. So not only did the pioneers in 1922 have to contend with dust clouds, so too did those going to church in this glorious new building, which was opened during the mid-1940s and which we continue to appreciate to this day. This is a great photo. This is a unique photo, I think, in La Sierra's history. I could be wrong, but it's the only one I've ever seen. It was taken in the late 60s or early 70s. I'm not 100% sure exactly the date. But if you look here, does anybody know what this building is right here? College Hall. College Hall. Okay, good. So there's, like for instance, I never saw this building. I never got to see it. It was the biggest building. It was the auditorium and gymnasium, and when the school burned down, they had classes there. They did baptisms there. This is where I think the biggest crowd ever assembled on campus indoors came to see Ralph Nader in 1973, 1972, or wait, 71 or 72. But you can also see its replacement in the same photograph. So this was after the Alumni Pavilion had been constructed, but before they tore down College Hall. So you get to see both. You get to see progress, you get to see the future, but you also get to see the past. I read somewhere that more couples were formed at College Hall than any other location on campus. And probably not during chapel, probably during the many events that they had there. Yeah, oh, yeah, thank you. I was going to mention that we all know it because in the Constantine parking lot, I'm not sure what parking lot number it is, but the sort of the concrete parking lot that has the sort of the sloped, that's the foundation. That's the original foundation. And the pool was right nearby there as well. Yes, the slope is original because they could put chairs on it and people could see over the top. And they could supposedly fit 2,500 people in there. It was a huge building. Camp meetings, yeah. I mean, it was I think I read that square footage wise, David Gerges would know this. The square footage wise, the Zapara School of Business might be bigger than College Hall was, but those are clearly the two biggest buildings on campus. Of course, College Hall was a single story with rafters, and some of those pictures will appear in the book. Of course, the School of Business has a lot of different functionality as well. So somewhere in this photograph, and you're not going to be able to really see it, you can kind of see it, is what I think, and Michelle Rojas in the Heritage Room of the library might disagree with me, but I think it's the most photographed subject on campus. Does anyone want to guess what it is? It's down at the very bottom, those little dots. Cows. I swear, if you walked into the Heritage Room, you close your eyes and you throw a rock, it's going to hit a picture of a cow, it seems like. And that tells us something about the early campus and the importance of cattle. The industry was important to the first 60 years of the campus. Milk and byproducts from the cows, eggs from chickens. It was important to be self-sustaining. And the La Sierra College Dairy Label was award-winning. I read this one account in the archives about how we went to the LA County Fair and entered our milk in 6 competitions and ended up getting 8 different ribbons because other dairies would buy up our milk and mix it with their own. And so you got half a ribbon. So they got like 6 full ribbons and 2 half ribbons for their milk. It was a very important aspect to this area. I just kind of put this in. I have yet to find a high-resolution photograph of George Stearns, the farm manager. But the farm manager played like often in charge. If like Carl Alms and Constantine were gone, George Stearns, the farm manager carried quite a bit of power. Oh, he was that I didn't realize, and I know Michael's doing some research into Old Boar. He was often seen. He would ride. He had the stallion that no one else was allowed to ride. That he would ride around campus. Not just on, and I have some photographs of this, but they're unfortunately kind of low resolution, so we'll see if we can include them in the, I just had to put this one in. The guy's being very stern about it, but you can find tons of pictures of horses as well, including this horse, which was a little bit of a celebrity. It's the only animal and the only non-human that I have ever found that I think it was mostly a joke. It's tough to sometimes read humor 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and be 100% sure tongue is planted firmly in cheek. But there was a little bit at one point a push to give this horse a diploma. He was so in the Criterion. He was an escape artist. And you just read article after article. Oscar escaped again, and like all the boys in theology class saw him, and so the teacher said, "Go get Oscar," and they go running out and chase him all over campus. And I think one year he escaped 8 times or something. This was what things were like in the 1930s on campus. Everyone worked on the farm. Everyone, knew how to deliver a calf. It was just a very different time period. The award-winning Veggie Pro eggs also won awards throughout Southern California. One of the original chicken coops burned down, also suspected to be of arson. The chicken coops used to be up towards the church. Then, of course, they were relocated and were for many years down on the farm. And also airplanes. The reason we have so many aerial photographs from the 1930s and 40s, and then they kind of cut out in the 1950s, is after about 1952, you had to hire somebody to do this for you. Whereas literally, you would find up through the 1950s, you'd find a competition on campus, and the winner of the competition would be taken up for a flight over campus. And so people would just take up their cameras and click, click, click. So you had a lot of... I don't think this is the actual runway. I hope not. The runway was reported by, I think it's about 1952, is being talked about how it's just covered in weeds. And it was a few years after that they planted corn on it. So no more airstrip at La Sierra anymore. Yes, and this is a special photograph for me because one of my earliest memories, I was 1 year old when we moved here in 1974, I guess. 9 months, yeah, I was 9 months old. I can barely remember the horseshoe that I'm going to point out. This was the administration building for the farm, and there was a sort of a horseshoe drive that had a paddock in the middle, and they would put baby animals in there. They put calves, and they would put lambs and kids, baby goats. And after church, we would come down and look at and that's from the earliest. So I think by 1978, when I have a lot of memories, this was probably gone.
I have one memory of it.
Oh, and you were born in 1976. So yeah, Stephanie, my sister, was one of the bicentennial babies on campus. So probably maybe as late as 1980, but it was gone very, very, very quickly after that, which was a real shame because it was a great way. And it wasn't just people from Los Sierras, people from the community would come and enjoy it and maybe pick up some milk. This is the farm today. The decision was controversial, with many in the extended campus family protesting the decision, although it provided financial windfall for the university and continues to do so. And, this is the sort of the third act of what I call cow finances. If Constantine had his citrus diplomacy, I think we should embrace the term bovine financing. In the 1920s and into the early 30s, it was not unusual for cows to be sold off to make final budget for La Sierra University. I'm not sure what a cow would have to secrete instead of milk today, like liquid gold, in order for that to occur. But that was a common practice, to sell off a part of the herd in order to make your final year budget. Even after that, even in the 40s and 50s, you read maybe like 4 or 5 articles over about a 10-year period for donations of cows to an SDA school in Costa Rica. And it was to help the school, Seventh-day Adventist school that was struggling, but it was also for the taxable write-offs that could be had at the end of the year. And then finally, the sale of the land resulted, a sale from part of the land, David Gerges talks about it a little bit in his article, his chapter for the Centennial, resulted in something that is called the Cow Fund, which funds scholarships that continue to pay off to students 20 years later. So it is too bad that but it was the price of progress and of financial security and what really needed to happen in Western Riverside, I think, moving into this part of our history.
You mentioned sale of the land. Many people don't realize.
Oh, some of it's leased. Some of it's leased, yeah.
All the way around the campus, it's leased.
Yeah, and I need to be careful with my verbiage there. Yeah. So this is sort of what it looks like today. Thanks to Michael Schofield this is actually from 1926, so it's not the very first, what you could have expected to pay. But as you can see, number one, the prices were very, very different than they are today. And number two, there was an expectation that you would work on campus and that work would help sustain the mission of the school and would help you with your education.
Is there any evidence of early days folks with physical disability and work arrangements?
No, there's not. Yeah, I've never run across anything in the criteria that addresses. Yeah, I'm sure they had things that I was under this model when I attended Newbold College. By that point, there have been so many hue and cry that you only had to contribute 4 hours a week, essentially. But they had different ones for different people. Like they took one look at me and knew that I wasn't going to be able to do heavy, labor. So I just sat, I staffed the front desk and answered phone calls and stuff like that. But, I'm sure that, the first thing I came across regarding disability in the criterion is from like 1972, and it was about a blind student, and sort of concluding that this campus is kind of tough for blind people to navigate, I think part of that is the general consciousness raising when it came to various groups of people and the challenges that they faced, whether it be social challenges or physical challenges. I'm sure there's some, just accommodations were just sort of made without overly talking about it in documents that we have at our disposal. Somewhere it mentioned that this is the first criterion staff. I'm not sure I see Raymond Cottrell in here. There is a photograph of the first criterion staff with Raymond Cottrell, but it's not of a high enough resolution that we can use. This one is. So I'm going to send this out and see if it is indeed. The college criterion was actually called the College Cushy for reasons that have been lost to history, before it was rebranded mercifully in 1929 as the Criterion, which it has been known ever since. Is that him second from right? Okay, so this is this is the first, is indeed the first Criterion staff. 1929. So no less a figure was the first editor of the Criterion, and it's a professional newspaper. If the Cushy is only available if you go into, and it's just kind of like almost like a typed up sheet of paper. It's not a real newspaper necessarily. And it's too bad it's no longer called this, but it was called the Critter up until probably the 1980s as short for Criterion. Certainly by the time that my sister and Nate and David, by the time we were here, I don't think it was called that anymore. And Nate, you were actually an editor.
David's how we got him out that year.
But I think, Nate, you... Okay. Nate's being too modest. Nate was, in fact, the editor of the Criterion, and there might be some others in here as well. I'm not sure. Well, there is a sidebar that will go into much more detail on the Criterion. This is one of my favorite. It gets attributed to different time periods, so it's kind of hard to know exactly what building it is. One of the things I've seen says early 1930s, and I wouldn't bet against it because of the way they're dressed. However, another source has written on the back administration building, which means this would have either been from 1922, which it clearly isn't, or it would have been in the early 1940s. And I think that might be Vernon Luthus, third from the right, a Panamanian student who came here and was an absolute mover and shaker. Once again, I'm going to have to send this one out for forensics and see if anybody who was here before I was can date it a little bit more specifically. But, just kind of the idea of proudly posing with your instrument, clearly having some organization and musical ability, even though we can't hear them, but doing so in a still developing school in the dirt tells you something about the pioneer days. Adventist Colleges Abroad was started by John T. Hamilton, sort of unofficially at first and later officially. And there are those of us in this room that took part in it and benefited from it to a tremendous degree. This is a cohort getting ready to go to France, and with Marguerite Hiltz on the far left, the one sitting down. I'm going to try to find I found a few photographs of her, which are not very high enough quality to use, but other than being awesome, other than teaching me French, or at least trying to teach me French, since I wasn't very good at languages, my sister got all the language. She holds the record for the longest continuous teaching span at La Sierra, which was at least 57 years. Yeah. I'm not, and I know that she was 57 because I know what year she came, and the class I took from her was 57 years later. Now, I believe that was her final year. She may have been here one more year. Okay, so I don't think it was 60. I think she was before 2000. I can figure it out. I just need to spend a little bit more time with the bulletins, which is astonishing. She saw nearly 60% of our history. I would say that this is ancient Greek, but it's actually ancient Hebrew. So it wasn't just modern languages. It was also, I think this was much more common back then. We do still offer classes in ancient languages, but now it's something that's only taken by theology majors, when, as before, mostly theology majors, but other people were taking these as well. Just a few individuals from this more middle period, you might say. Edward Heppenstall. Very formative and important for Adventist, sort of mid-century Adventist theology, especially at the 1952 Bible Conference, where, among other things, he advanced a notion of the Old Covenant, New Covenant, Old Testament, New Testament, sort of not anger of God, but sort of the judgment of God versus the mercy of God. Oh, great! Yeah, that will be something to read. He really was. He was British, and didn't spend his entire career here, but while he was here, he made some huge contributions to the Seventh-day Adventist Church and its theology.
I have his marriage license.
I've always thought he looks a little bit like George Orwell, by the way. So, Alfred Walters and Perry Beach. There's a series, about a half a dozen of these, 6, 7, 8 of these, contributed to the Centennial book collection by Cynthia Cooley Vest. She penned these in 1961, and both of these were iconic music professors at La Sierra, who really, along with Harold Hannum and others, really built our music department into something at that point, something special, and it still is today, with our faculty all over, contributing all over the world. Frederick G. Hoyt, someone very near and dear to my heart. And if you went on the campus tree walk, you met his daughter, Corky. Dr. Hoyt was the first to go off to war in World War II. And he was on campus other than his time in the Central Pacific. And most of the time in graduate school, he still taught a class here, like at least one quarter. So pretty much, other than just a few years in the U.S. Navy, he was on campus between 1937 and his passing in 2012, 75 years. He was very instrumental in my journey as a historian as well. The tennis group, Gene, on the left to right on the top row, Gene Nash in the music and later physical education department, Herbert Henkin, an OBGYN from Loma Linda, and then Cal Joe Maggie he was a German professor. And then the bottom row, Bill Napier from physical education, Alfred Walters in music, and Frederick G. Hoyt in history. I love this, and I hope that Dr. Dunn, my old professor, Dr. Dunn, is watching this on the live stream. But I also love this picture because I remember this slide with so much fondness. It was probably gone by the early 1980s. I think we went to New York for a year, and it was gone when it came back, and I, felt the first true injustice in the world or something. But there's just one thing I love about La Sierra is when I go in the cafeteria and I see faculty eating with students, and students coming to support faculty and faculty supporting students, and it's just a lot of fun. Transportation, this is the Academy's bus from the 1930s. It was also used by the university for field trips, the most anticipated of which was the snow day and the senior picnic. 50 years later, methods of transportation had changed just a bit. My dad claims that the best skateboarder on campus in the 1970s was actually a member of the Harding clan, whose journey with La Sierra is very storied. Cynthia Harding was the best skateboarder on campus. Technology. This is not a dishwasher and 2 refrigerators. It's actually a computer. And this is indeed the mathematics and computer science faculty at that time. Hilmer Basil, Vernon Howe, Carlisle Fleming, Barry Graham, and Jeff Jones. Hilmer Basil on the far left, who came to campus mid-career in 1960, never moved away after retiring until his passing just shy of his 100th birthday, walking to campus daily to eat in the cafeteria and commiserate with faculty and students. There's about, I'd say, 5 documented cases in literature of not just snow where it melts when it hits the ground, which I've seen a few times in my lifetime, but where it snows and it stays on the ground, including one that was so bad that the snow was so deep that that one happened to be when the students, it was like 2 days before Christmas or something, or maybe 2 days after Christmas. No one was on campus. One of the security cars tried driving and stopped and didn't realize they got high centered on something. I mean, it was like feet of snow. There's also been an ice storm with 3-inch icicles, drought leading to fires. You'll read all about the Charles Teal house, the Teal home almost burning in the Centennial Book Project. Floods, including one flood where the university was isolated for close to a week because all the bridges were out and all the roads were washed out, and windstorms. The Stahl Center, Charles Teal makes a pretty big appearance in this book, and the Stahl Center, of course, was his vision, and of their many projects, including Global Village, when different habitats from around the world were sort of like a Habitat for Humanity thing. Thousands of people visited this. Was the other one that's photographed in the next slide is global quilting, where as many as 20,000 quilts for AIDS babies were solicited and contributed to La Sierra to disperse in areas with a lot of needy infants. Finally, New Frontiers. Just during the Randall Wisby's presidency, our latest building went up, the Zapara School of Business, won all sorts of architectural awards. It continues to be a real asset and boon for this campus, but it's not the newest building for long, since a wellness center is coming very soon. So I see I'm running a little late on time, but I will just continue forging on ahead. We're getting close to the end now. Just a few slides based on why we're doing a history book now. Well, first of all, 100 is a nice round number. It's a good opportunity for reflection, and it's never bad to tell your story, particularly when we're living in a changing world. La Sierra has undergone many changes in the past several decades. We split from Loma Linda 32 years ago, almost a third of our identity, but we still link some of our immediate history to that split, including some things that we learned from this time period. The split itself was somewhat traumatic, but we learned about the importance of research and about faculty governance and other things which have been transformative for our institution. It was a little bit about what, in the 90s, was about what institution we would become during the Garrity presidency. Who are we going to be as an Adventist institution, and who are we going to be as an institution of higher education? And how are we going to kind of walk that fine line sometimes where those two come into a little bit of disagreement? But now it's time to reevaluate how we've done when it comes to that identity that was forged. It's time to think about how we want to continue on this track in the future, or what changes we want to make. Some of the changes that have just been happening around us are urbanization, the rapid growth of first-generation college attenders who have attended La Sierra University, and in particular, the fact that we are now, and have been for quite a few years now, a Hispanic-serving institution. We also acknowledge that there are contested ideologies sometimes in our church that challenge our dual identity as an SDA institution and one of higher education. Several chapters, for instance, touch on the women's ordination issue. So it's a good time to connect the past to the present and to project to the future. We have to understand who we were and how we got here in order to figure out where we are going and where we want to go, and then begin to figure out how do we get there. So there is a little bit of a prehistory to this Centennial book collection. Kel J. Reynolds wrote about the first 20 years, and then in the 1970s, in his retirement, he was sort of the first historian at La Sierra in the 20s, and he was continued to write about little small history pieces about La Sierra University. For the 75th anniversary, there was a planned book, which never materialized. However, some chapters were put together, and Gary Chartier collected those, solicited a few more, wrote a few himself, and a special double issue of the La Sierra University magazine was published for the 75th anniversary. The university, and I do want to give a little bit of credit to Joel Haldeman, who dropped by my office one day and said, "Is there going to be a Centennial book project?" And I said, "I don't know. Let me look into it." And then here we are. But I was very pleased when the university and President Randall Wisby approved this project and agreed to funding it and support for it in 2016. By 2018, we had adopted the multi-author edited collection model, and we have been working on it ever since. And I'm also very pleased to have, for the past 4 years, it's been my absolute pleasure to work with Gary M. Ross. He and I share something very special, which is that we both were history majors at La Sierra and then came back to be professors in the department, our undergraduate department. I still remember, probably about the age of 6 or 7, putting some flowers on his doorstep. This would have been about 1979, ringing the doorbell and then running and hiding behind a fence. My family used to celebrate May Day. And as I point out to Gary from time to time, who knew that 40 years later that I'd be bugging him by turning in drafts late to him and stuff like that. It's not exactly. I felt like sometimes I should ring his doorbell, put the pile of papers, and then run away. But he's been just a absolute privilege to work with on this project. There's going to be 23 chapters written by 21 authors, lots and lots of mini essays and photographs. We anticipate an October 3rd release, the 100th anniversary. And then I'll just kind of put this up here and just say that, we're how did we cut the chapters? Well, 4 of them are chronological chapters, sort of the La Sierra Academy Normal School and Southern California Junior College. That's going to be contributed by Catherine Coe. The La Sierra College Years by Jonathan Butler, both professional historians, academic historians. And then the Loma Linda years, also called the merger years sometimes, and the La Sierra University years, Warren Trenchard, a New Testament studies scholar. Thematic chapters, too many authors to list here. You'll find out who they are in October, but there's let's see, there are 17 more that I haven't named by name. Writing, student government, World War II, buildings and grounds theology, the Black experience at La Sierra, research, visual arts, music, science, campus centers, social justice, and many other thematic chapters. And then lots and lots of different mini essays. If you come tomorrow to the table I'll be staffing, I'll have some of these mini essays there. You can pick them up and take them with you and get a little bit of a preview. Okay, finally, the journey continues. This is the same slide that I used at the outset. This October, the sun will set on La Sierra's first centennial and rise on its second. There are challenges that lie ahead, institutionally, locally when it comes to demographic challenges, with more institutions competing for a smaller group of prospective students, nationally vis-a-vis contested ideologies, both in the United States and the Adventist Church. However, the spirit of the pioneers is still very much in those of us who call La Sierra home. And after the book closes on the first 100 years and these celebrations conclude, the institution will look to the future armed with a mission that combines Christian SDA values with excellence in higher education training and energizing new generations of students to take up meaningful work and service. Thank you very much. And I think I'm not sure if there's anything at this next stage. So I'm happy to answer questions that anybody has. But if you have another thing to run off to, feel free to slip out the back. Questions? Yeah, Nate, Professor Sutter.
The barn on the farm, you know when that was built?
I do not. That was built. It wasn't part of the original farm. You can see pictures. Maybe 15, 20 years in, and it's still not built. But it was already, by the time I was a campus kid, it was. I don't think it was condemned at that point, but it was starting to move in that direction. And it used to.
That was for horses?
Yeah. And of course, then later there was the Bill Dopp Equestrian Center, which it was called the Stables, which was for headquartering the horses, and that's the point I think that the barn was doomed. It did have a barn owl that would nest there at one point. Questions, Nate, Professor Sutter.
220 something is the bird species?
It's about, I think it might be about 230, about 220 of which have been witnessed since 1974. There are, I think, 10 species from observations in the 1940s which cannot be verified at this point, but which we've chosen. They seem legitimate. There's no real surprises. Yeah.
Cushman was a major early.
He was, yeah.
Was there somebody in the 20s? Was there?
Cushman came in 1930, and he didn't really create a bird list though. He just birded.
He collected all.
Well, yeah, he shot birds. You could, in fact, something I have to do this quarter is get into Palmer Hall and find a wood stork that he shot and take photographs of it and post it on eBird, because it's actually a very significant record for this campus. But it was actually a guy. It was actually Helen Thompson's husband. I think it was at George Alden Thompson. Did his master's thesis at Redlands in the biology department there. Like in 1942, 43, and he did it as the birds of La Sierra. And there's a monograph in the Heritage Room. So the records of all the old records are of the 10 or 11 species. I think it's 11 species that we count from that era. 10 of them come from this book. And then the one of them is the wood stork that, Dad, I believe that you have actually seen, right? Yeah, people have seen it. I mean, we know it's real. But all the ones since have been from a number of people, 3 of which are in this room, and a number of other people who have contributed bird sightings, which have been verified since 1974.
Has been negative with the urbanization.
Yeah.
With Riverwalk having a different habitat, we picked up, half a dozen species.
Yeah. And
Osprey in the soccer field I saw a few years ago. You never see that.
No.
Eric, was the high water table water feature stuff that you and I heard in the 90s? Was that water table stuff there in the 20s, 30s?
Oh yeah, they had a lot of drainage problems, and that's going to be addressed a little bit in the book about the what happened with the drainage. There was actually Lake Constantine, it was called, which was, I don't know if that was.
We didn't go swimming.
No. Well, you could, but it was effluent based, I think is the technical. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Like, for instance, you probably have noticed, and Professor Sutter has actually done a lot of research on them, and his students have in GBio, the acorn woodpeckers that are ubiquitous on campus. Are very noisy. You've probably seen or at least heard them as you're walking around. They first appeared in, I think, March of 1994. Right? Is that correct? Yeah.
3 birds, and you can tell them by a very subtle mark, male or female. And I can't remember if it's either 2 males or a female or vice versa. So we had hope, and sure enough.
And now they're destroying the buildings, incidentally. So, yeah, we were very glad when they set up shop here, but they've certainly taken a liking to La Sierra Hall.
We have 50 oak trees on campus.
Yeah, and that's why.
See them on the palm trees.
Well, that's their storage.
Mariana and date palms are roost holes and nest holes, and then the fan palms, where they're cut in the X pattern, it looks like a machine gun shot through there. That's them drilling, and they're storing acorns, thousands of acorns.
Do they have to have a fence? They farm acorns. They put them in there to get.
Now, Nate, you when they cut down one of the silo trees, how many acorns did your students?
I mean, there were thousands of acorns.
Yeah.
Just loose stuff in there.
Yeah.
Maury Jackson's talked about throwing books against the wall of his office when they're drilling on the exterior.
There is a chapter, incidentally, on sort of the botanical garden and other forms of non-human life on this campus. So that's going to be a chapter in this collection. Yes.
Interesting, during COVID, the animal life really thrived, and for me to get back on campus, it was just amazing how there were more birds. I mean, the students, I mean, they tolerate it, but they loved having this green space to themselves, coyotes and birds.
Professor Clark.
Have you devoted any inches to the telescope we have at the top?
Yes, there is it's not a lot, unfortunately, but the Barnard Observatory is referenced in a couple of places, and it talks. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that is a significant aspect to our institutional history for sure. Dean McBride.
Do we know when the Founders Green became?
I don't know. At one point, the famous, iconic citrus was above the first three buildings. You saw that in one of the photographs, I think. I have seen photographs where there was citrus down here too. So, there was putting in stuff, taking out stuff. The campus looks very, very different. Like for instance, Pepper Drive was something that was very iconic, but you have to go back a long, long way to remember Pepper Drive. And actually, if you walk along Pierce Street, which you can now sort of see as the road below us, actually used to be above us. You can actually, if you go out here and look up and down, you sort of can tell that the main thoroughfare used to be right here on this side. Of course, that became dangerous. More students, more vehicular traffic, faster cars. So they moved the road down here. The director of security, when I was a student at La Sierra University, was hit by a car and forced into early retirement. Letty, do you remember Diana Narozniak? It was her father. Bob Byrne, I think his name was. And it wasn't just a glancing blow. He got, he had to retire essentially. And so, children would sometimes get out of the child care center and wander out into Pierce Street. It was a very, when I was a student here, Pierce was still a kind of a dangerous operation. Yeah. So I think one thing that was very, very good about developing the land was putting the main thoroughfare way down there away from us, just for noise pollution, but also for safety.
One of the most amazing things, a fellow, fortunately, he was dead drunk, and I think he survived, but they figured he might have been going close to 120 miles an hour, hit one of the palm trees down there, the very, very tall palm trees. And he went and looked there, you could just see a little bit of scuffing, but it snapped the top of that palm tree off, it hit it, and it like a whip. And for a long time before they replaced it. But we had students crossing the street.
Yeah, I remember, like, if I was late to gym class, I sometimes had to think, should I just try to run across here? There doesn't look like there's much traffic coming. I don't want to wait till it says to walk. And boy, those cars would be on you very, very quickly. So I think we're
College Market, we almost got hit.
yeah. So it's a much different setup now than it was, and it's a much more safety oriented campus, I think. in the last 30, 40 years. Nate.
I am bogarting the conversation. Fritz Guy has told me that he remembers the young men leaping over trees in Founders Green. And we were talking about the fan palms, but maybe some others. Do you know any of dates of planting of some of those giant oak trees? The Southpaw oak is a huge tree, right?
I don't. You can find photographs that show that there wasn't much, but that there was. You can see from old photographs that there were already plantings here on campus from multiple continents before. I don't remember seeing oak. I do remember seeing eucalyptus, like from only 3 buildings, or maybe even 2 buildings. Eucalyptus, and I remember seeing pepper as well. So there were.
These are young trees. So they're like
No. Some of the eucalyptus were fairly good sized. Yeah, they were planted in the 19th century for sure. Yeah.
My father told me that they used to jump over those palm trees that were real small in the picture. They would challenge each other to see if they could get over them.
So we have 2 independent verifications from the story.
It'd be a little hard now, I think.
They were pretty tall when we were kids, because I remember
Oh,
being
yeah.
like a survival of the fittest. And I remember the students ran up to it and they went on ropes between the palm trees and stuff.
Any other questions? Well, thanks to all of you, not just for showing up to hear about the history of La Sierra, but contributing so actively in different ways to the history of this wonderful institution. May its next 100 years be as good as its first 100. Thank you very much.